There's something that happens at NFL press conferences that most people walk away from completely missing. And I don't mean the obvious stuff, the canned answers, the coach deflections, the deliberate vagueness that's become so routine it barely registers anymore. I mean something deeper than that. There's an architecture underneath the language that tells you everything the words themselves are designed to conceal. The way a coach's answer breathes when he actually believes what he's saying. The way it tightens, almost imperceptibly, when he's managing a situation that's already been resolved inside the building, but can't yet be resolved publicly. I've been around this long enough that I genuinely can't unhear it anymore. It's involuntary at this point. And when Todd Monken stood at that podium yesterday and told everyone, carefully and methodically, that the competition in Cleveland remains genuinely open, that every quarterback is being evaluated on equal footing, that nothing has been finalized, I heard every word he said. I also heard something else entirely. And what wasn't said yesterday was the most important communication that came out of that press conference. Shedeur Sanders has won the Cleveland quarterback job. I'm not going to ease into that or frame it with excessive qualification because the evidence doesn't require it. There's no official announcement coming today. The organizational language out of that building will stay strategically neutral right up until the moment they decide to make it formal, because that's how these things always work. But the actual decision, the one that shapes how coaching energy gets allocated, how conversations happen behind closed doors, how every person inside that facility is orienting toward the coming season, that decision has already been made. It's been living inside that building for weeks. Dylan Gabriel's time in Cleveland is effectively finished. Deshaun Watson's body has settled what his career history alone was never going to be able to fully resolve. And when you remove all of that honestly, without softening what the evidence actually shows, what remains has been pointing in one direction for a long time now. Let me take you inside what happened with Gabriel yesterday, because the most important moment in that entire press conference wasn't about anything Monken said regarding him explicitly. It was about something far more telling, the quality of how he talked about him. Here's what I've learned from years of paying close attention to these things. When a coach genuinely believes a player is still in a real competition for something meaningful, he gets specific without consciously deciding to. He references a throw from practice last Wednesday without being prompted. He describes a decision a quarterback made under pressure in a team period and what it told him about how that player processes information under stress. He mentions something that shifted in the film room, some moment where a dimension of the player's game became visible that hadn't been fully clear before. That specificity isn't manufactured for the microphone. It's just what genuine belief sounds like when it's operating naturally, when a coach isn't calculating the public effect of his answer because he's simply telling you what he actually witnesses every day. That quality was entirely absent when Gabriel came up yesterday. In its place was something different. Flat, careful, professionally managed language. The kind that coaches develop specifically for situations they've already resolved internally but haven't yet made official. He wasn't discussed the way coaches discuss quarterbacks they're genuinely still weighing. He was discussed the way coaches discuss transitions that are already underway, just waiting for the organizational calendar to catch up to where reality has already moved. And in this league, when that specific texture disappears from a head coach's language around a quarterback, no official depth chart changes what it means. The decision has already happened. I'll go further than that. My read is that trade conversations around Gabriel aren't on the horizon. They're already in motion, quietly, while the public statements remain carefully positioned. But what his departure actually does for that quarterback room matters more than whatever transaction eventually gets made, and most of the coverage around this situation is completely missing that dimension. His presence in Cleveland has been generating friction all offseason. Not the visible kind that makes it into beat reporting. The kind that compounds invisibly across weeks. The kind every member of that coaching staff has had to manage continuously without it ever surfacing as a story. When a player genuinely believes, regardless of whether that belief is entirely accurate, that the competition he entered was tilted before it started. That conviction changes the atmosphere of a shared professional space in ways that are real and costly, even when no one is talking about them publicly. Coaching attention that should be entirely directed at building something gets divided. Energy that belongs to football development gets spent managing the interpersonal dynamics that the competitive situation has made unavoidable. Clear that, and the room reorganizes around something sharper and more directional. That transition, from a divided environment managing competing internal narratives to a unified one building a specific identity together, carries competitive value that almost no one in the analytical conversation around roster construction ever fully weights properly. The Watson portion of yesterday's press conference is where I think the real conversation needs to happen, because what Monken communicated there is going to land differently for people once they actually sit with it. He was deliberate about Watson in a way that felt considered rather than instinctive. And I want to be fair about this. The respect for Watson's football intelligence was real. The acknowledgement of everything he's accumulated over his career, the situational knowledge, the understanding of how NFL defenses operate under genuine competitive pressure, that didn't feel performed. Monken meant it. But underneath those acknowledgments, running quietly beneath the surface of every careful answer, was the absence of something specific and important. There was no confidence expressed, not even the carefully hedged, indirect version coaches produce when they genuinely feel it, that Watson can carry the full operational weight of a 17-game season as the primary starter. That particular assurance never appeared. It wasn't stated directly because Monken is far too experienced to make a statement that exposed about a player still on his active roster. But the absence of it was loud enough that I couldn't stop noticing it across the entire exchange, no matter how professionally it was packaged. The honest organizational math around Watson is something the people inside that building have already completed, and it isn't complicated once you stop softening it. The injury history isn't a media narrative, it's a documented medical reality that any serious evaluation has to account for without looking away from what it actually shows. Constructing a sophisticated offensive system around a quarterback, building the chemistry between passer and receivers, between quarterback and offensive line, between signal caller and coordinator's vision for attacking different defensive structures week to week. That process requires months of accumulated real repetitions. It cannot be paused around injury interruptions and cleanly resumed at the point where it stopped. Every interruption costs something that requires time to rebuild, and the rebuild never quite restores what existed before the pause. When you run the full honest projection, not the optimistic version, the one that actually accounts for real physical uncertainty, the math doesn't produce a rational case for building your offensive identity around Watson as the primary starter when a genuine developing alternative is available. Monken has completed that projection. The front office has completed it. Yesterday was the first moment that conclusion became audible in the public language for anyone paying close enough attention to catch it. What Watson can genuinely contribute in the right structure deserves honest acknowledgement before this conversation moves completely past him, because it's actually significant. Everything he carries from operating at a high level inside NFL offenses, the defensive structures he's read under genuine pressure, the situational intelligence that only develops through surviving hard moments with real stakes attached, the psychological understanding of how to manage an offense when the game plan has broken down and improvisation becomes the only remaining option. All of that becomes a living resource available to Shedeur every single week in the right arrangement. In the film room the day before the game. In sideline conversations between series, when a young quarterback needs the perspective of someone who has already survived the most difficult version of exactly what he's currently navigating. Watson in that role, authentically committed to making that knowledge available rather than quietly managing resentment about where his career has arrived, is genuinely one of the more valuable backup situations available anywhere in the league right now. What's coming out of Cleveland suggests that internal conversation has already happened and came back with the answer the organization needed. So the room clears, Gabriel moves toward the exit, and the friction dissolves with him. Watson gets repositioned as veteran intelligence rather than primary starter, and everything he knows gets redirected towards someone who can actually build on it. And what's left when all of that clearing is complete is exactly what the evidence has been pointing toward for months. Shedeur Sanders at the top of the depth chart, with real organizational commitment operating behind him, not quietly hedging against him, not managing competing narratives around him, but actually committed to building something through him. And I need to be precise about something here, because it gets compressed in most versions of this story in ways that distort what's actually been accomplished. He is not there by default. He didn't win this because the alternatives collapsed spectacularly enough to create an opening he could step into passively. He won it because he built an undeniable case through the quality of his preparation and the consistency of his behavior across months of genuine organizational pressure. Pressure that was not always constructed to support his success, and sometimes was quietly constructed to test whether he'd crack under the weight of it. The way Shedeur won this matters as much as the outcome, and I mean that without any exaggeration. He didn't do it with a single moment that everyone could point to. One throw in one practice that shifted the narrative dramatically and gave the coaching staff permission to commit. He didn't create attention-generating episodes that produce short-term momentum but leave long-term complications in their wake. He won the way quarterbacks who build real professional careers always win jobs that weren't handed to them, by showing up when showing up was genuinely harder than it appeared from the outside. By handling situations that would have fractured less grounded players with a composure that communicated something to the coaching staff that no individual performance in any individual drill could communicate on its own. The accumulated message he sent through the daily consistency of his behavior across an entire offseason of real pressure was that when the season gets hard, and NFL seasons always get hard eventually, he is not going to be the problem the coaching staff has to solve in the middle of it. He is going to be what they reach for when the problem needs solving. That message, delivered without drama and without interruption, is what moves an experienced head coach toward genuine commitment more reliably than any physical attribute or highlight package. Shedeur sent it through every channel available to him. Monken received it. Yesterday was the first public moment that it became audible to anyone paying close enough attention. What's being constructed around Shedeur in Cleveland is worth real attention because I think it's one of the more deliberately assembled developmental environments built around a young quarterback in recent memory. The Spencer Fano pick at the top of the draft wasn't a subtle organizational signal. It was a declaration made in the most valuable currency a franchise possesses, communicating something precise about where institutional priorities actually sit. Franchises don't spend top 10 selections on offensive tackles unless the quarterback they're protecting is genuinely worth that level of commitment. And Fano isn't a developmental project who needs a season to grow into meaningful contribution. He arrives as a ready-now elite pass protector who surrendered essentially nothing against top competition across a significant college sample, the balance under pressure, the processing speed to read complex stunts and games in real time and adjust his protection scheme before the rusher arrives rather than committing to an assignment and hoping it holds when the rush changes. What he gives Shedeur is the thing developing quarterbacks most desperately need and most rarely actually receive early in their professional careers. Real time in the pocket, not compressed, panicked time that forces decisions before the full progression can develop. Genuine time that allows a young passer to work through his full read progression, to make accumulating confident decisions that build the cognitive foundation every quarterback at this level needs, rather than the reactive compressed decisions that build compensatory habits requiring years to identify and unlearn once they're fully ingrained. Casey Concepcion adds a dimension to this picture that I don't think is getting anywhere near the analytical attention it deserves. A route runner who generates genuine separation against tight man coverage is precisely what a developing quarterback needs most, because contested man coverage is the defensive structure that most consistently damages young passers before they're ready for it. Winning against man requires a quarterback to commit to the throw before the separation is fully visible at the top of the route. to trust that the receiver will execute the release and the break with the precision the concept demands before the visual confirmation arrives. That trust is built through repetition, through throwing to a receiver who delivers what the route requires consistently enough that the commitment precedes the calculation. Put a quarterback who processes defensive intentions quickly alongside a receiver who wins reliably in contested situations, and the combination forces defensive coordinators to account for it in ways that stress every other coverage decision they make against this offense. Add Denzel Boston on the outside, creating a completely different coverage problem with a completely different physical profile, and the compounding effect of receivers who demand fundamentally different defensive responses forces coordinators into compromises they cannot cleanly resolve. That's the distance between a functional receiving core and a genuine strategic weapon. The defensive foundation underneath all of this offensive construction finished top 5 in the league last season and has no structural reason for significant erosion. And that matters to Shedur's development more than most conversations are acknowledging. That defense keeps Cleveland competitive while the offense builds its identity and rhythm, which is the single most important thing a defensive unit can provide for a young quarterback navigating his first full season as the unquestioned starter. It eliminates the catastrophic early pressure of needing to be completely formed immediately, which is precisely the pressure that breaks talented young quarterbacks before their development reaches what their actual ceiling genuinely supports. A quarterback who trusts that his defense can keep the game manageable takes the calculated risks that make quarterbacks better over time. A quarterback who feels that any mistake might cost the game makes the conservative decisions that protect the immediate scoreboard while quietly stunting the long-term growth that won't become fully visible until the damage is already done. Cleveland is deliberately building an environment where the right kind of risk-taking is possible. That is not an accident. It is a design. 3 quarterbacks entered this process. One is being transitioned out of the building, and the head coach's own language has already communicated, for anyone willing to read it honestly, that he doesn't belong in what's being built there. One is being repositioned because the honest projection of his physical situation makes him a genuine asset in a supporting capacity and a real liability as a primary starter across a full season with real ambitions attached to it. And one has been building his case quietly, relentlessly, and with a composure that has been remarkable to observe, while the environment around him shifted and eventually cleared a direct path to where the evidence was always pointing. Monken said yesterday that no decision has been made. What he actually communicated, in the texture of every answer and every deliberate pause and every piece of language carefully chosen or carefully withheld, is that the decision has been made for weeks. The formal announcement is a procedural step. What it will announce has already, quietly and irreversibly, begun.